And it's that sort of agriculture, low input, but high tech, learning from science, learning from our knowledge of the DNA, that we can see doubling of yields in African countries and stuff.
Yeah, so okay, there's a lot to grapple with.
Yes, of course there is.
So first of all, on the safety of GM food, there is no credible evidence, and there's also no credible mechanism by which GM food could be any more unhealthy for you than any other food. The recent story from Seralini et al. Was statistically, it was impossible to draw the conclusions that they drew from it with any statistical
And who was that
credibility.
talking about?
There's a recent paper about which there was some publicity purporting to show that rats fed a diet with either GM soy or maize and or GM
But that was a
stuff,
scare.
Roundup plus the or nothing. They only had 10% of their animals were controls. I mean, it was. You can basically, it doesn't prove that GM is safe, but it doesn't prove that it's
It did follow the same protocol as companies like Monsanto follow to get their GM crops through the regulatory system. The sample size was 10 rats. It's the same breed of rat, which was then criticised when they discovered a possible problem.
But not kept for 2 years, which was a sort of animal health.
Carry on.
Sorry.
Okay, so there's no credible evidence that GM food is bad for you. Let's make an important point about GM. GM is just a method. It's like saying, if you're opposed to GM, it's like saying you're opposed to chemistry. You know, you can say I'm opposed to chemistry because you can make neurotoxins with it, or you can say I'm in favour of chemistry because it's a way of processing sugar into something I want to eat. But it's just a method. And the outcome is, as I said earlier, you start with a plant with a few tens of thousands of genes, and you add another gene or a few more genes, and you know what these genes are going to do. They're going to improve a property of the plant into which they have been put. Now, the one thing that's unpredictable about current methods, or at least the most used methods, is you can't figure out where in the plant genome it's going to end up. So what you do is you screen hundreds of events, and you find an event where it's causing collateral damage, and you take that one forward. And so you actually combine it with breeding. You generate variation, and then you exercise selection for ones that you confer the trait you want and have no collateral damage.
It's an extension of plant breeding, really.
Well, I would say so, and I think this is another point I wanted to make. So Peter, in my view, posits false antitheses, right, left and centre. Of course, marker-assisted selection is an important improvement in the plant breeder's arsenal. You can, basically what it means is you find little DNA variations that are linked to a property like disease resistance or fruit quality or whatever, and it means that you can screen many more progeny with this little molecular marker rather than having to what we call phenotype them, to actually do the assay to see if it's more resistant or more nutritional food. So it improves the process of plant breeding, that's great. You can select for particular combinations of traits, that's great. Although it is a problem, in fact, that we do seem to have a bit of a wheat yield plateau currently in the UK. It hasn't improved much in the last 10 years.
There is a wheat yield consortium, isn't there? It's been formed out the wheat yield.
There's a lot. I mean, there's a big shift in the last, I guess, 3 years. And this is something Peter and I think would both welcome, is that the world's leaders have actually woken up to the fact that we can't take food security for granted. We need to care about how we raise food and to ensure security of supply and sustainability of supply. There we'd absolutely agree with each other. Where we part company is that if I'd say that sort of the fundamental difference is about the kind of agriculture we want, and I think it's an important, actually a much more interesting discussion about what kind of agriculture we want than yes or no GM. But in my view, we do need yield, and all the data that are out there say that organic farming gives you somewhere between 50 and 80% of yields of conventional agriculture. You could argue about, I'm sure people would say that that's not sustainable to have the conventional agriculture, but in my view, we aim for the highest possible yields in defined areas where and the higher the yield in those areas, the more land we can
Yes,
spare
well,
for
farm,
wildlife
Peter's not against that, are you?
and biodiversity.
Are you?
I do share the view that there's a lot of work still to be done to optimise how we grow our crops, soil health. You know, Charlie Clutterbuck, who we were meeting yesterday, probably the last living soil zoologist in the UK. Very proud of it, but sad about it, because we're not training the next generation of soil scientists. We're not training the next generations of plant breeders in the UK. There's a lot more going on in Holland or developing countries. Top guy from Monsanto, Rob Fraley, gave a seminar at the John Innes 3 or 4 years ago.
I think
he said, right. So he said Monsanto has 1,000 plant breeders, 400 of whom will retire in the next 5 years. Where are we going to get them from? So it's partly an answer to the question, what's the best mode of interaction between the private and public sector? And as far as he's concerned, he wants a stream of willing recruits.
But if you've got to increase yields to feed the world.
You need. I mean, it's a problem. There's not enough.
Think about it,
there's not enough breeders coming through.
Can I just come back on yields before we lose that? You're quite right. Farmers are interested in output, but as any agricultural advisor will tell you, the key to making farm business profitable is to control your costs.
Of course.
Your input costs.
Yes.
And what we've seen in recent years is, we know the price of nitrogen fertiliser tracks the price of oil, because it's basically turning oil into fertiliser into food. And phosphate prices went up in the last big hike and have stayed up because phosphate is a mined mineral. There are limited supplies of it. We get all of ours from Morocco or from the Western Sahara, which is where many developed countries are now, like America, importing their phosphate, and it's limited. Without phosphate, leave aside nitrogen, all the other agrochemicals, if you just take phosphate out of a modern winter wheat, you get a yield equivalent to the yields available in the 1900s, early 1900s, well before the introduction of manufactured fertiliser. So my concern about the future of farming is that we should stop looking simply at yield as if inputs were inexhaustible and inexpensive, which indeed they were when I started.
Oh yes,
fine. And instead, we should look at yield per tonne of input per hectare. So we take into account what we have to put in to get the tonne of wheat out. And actually, while the wheat yields have plateaued, and when we get this year's harvest in the statistics, we'll see a drop, I'm afraid. All of us, terrible year. But what we've also seen in the last 20 years is the use efficiency of nitrogen declining rapidly. So even when we were getting increases...
The use of nitrogen or efficiency?
The efficiency. So even as we were seeing increases in wheat yields, the amount of nitrogen you needed to achieve that increased way beyond the increase in the yield you obtained. So we've bought high wheat yields in this country, much higher than North America, for example, with very high inputs of nitrogen, which I think are economically and environmentally unsustainable, because nitrogen fertiliser is a huge source of greenhouse gases, but the biggest after methane in agriculture. So I want to see a future of farming, Jonathan, where we use the agroecological and organic systems which take nutrients from the soil and nitrogen from the air without the use of fossil fuels, and much lower use of fossil fuels, and which provide an environmentally sustainable way of producing food. Now that will not increase yields. So with that has to go very significant changes in diet, which we need to make in any event for health reasons, going back to our eating vegetables, not burgers and fries. So in America now, 30% of kids will die before their parents because of obesity. I mean, it's staggering. And that obesity crisis is now hitting India and China. It's not just North America and Western Europe. Because as the middle class get rich, they're adopting American diets. So we have a twin challenge in agriculture and food. We need to radically change northern and western diets to make us healthier, and radically change agriculture to decrease the inputs. Now there's a win-win there. of eating more fruit and vegetables, instead of 50% of our wheat going to feed animals, most of it, the grain is going to feed humans, and much less meat being eaten.
If we have GM, we thereby decrease with luck inputs, don't we?
But as I say, from North America North America so far, the evidence is you increase inputs because pesticide use overall has gone up. The current crops don't affect fertiliser use.
Can I chime in? I mean, there's a lot on what you just said that I agree with on sustainability and particularly the need for improved nitrogen use efficiency. And nitrogen use efficiency is actually a major target of the genetic engineers, and actually getting nitrogen out of the air is an even more, but certainly very substantial.
Talk at length to your colleague who's doing this work, Charles, walking around the farm, arguing fiercely.
But the most important thing. Sorry, I've totally lost the thread suddenly with the thought of Giles wandering around.
He likes walking around organic farms. There's lots of wildlife and wild flowers.
So what doesn't make sense to me is why, if you agree that nitrogen use efficiency is something we need to increase, you have this sort of fetishized opposition to this one technology. Is it just because Monsanto might control it? Surely what you should be in favour of is a greatly expanded public sector GM activity.
Peter,
you bring back the Plant Breeding Institute and let's bring these traits out, test them in the public sector and deliver them from the public sector.
So if we can narrow it, I mean, to be clear, I'm not, nor friends of the other Greenpeace members, opposed to genetic modification as a technology. We're not opposed to GM medicines, and certainly not opposed to any of the science. But there are products that result from science. They're not science, they're goods that companies sell and people buy.
So we can look at them on a case-by-case basis.
Okay, so GM crops,
let's work out
we would look at them as a category. And I'll explain why. Okay, I'll explain why. For 2 or 3 reasons, apart from the question of ownership and control and price fixing. Leave that aside.
That's a big subject point.
Yeah, but actually not initially. When I was at Greenpeace, our main concern was that these crops were being released into an environment, the agricultural environment, farm ecosystems, about which we knew then and still know very little. We still haven't identified most of the huge majority of living organisms in soil, for example. Although unravelling DNA is now speeding up that process very interestingly.
We're learning more all the time.
We're learning more all the time. But it's still really an unknown. And we were worried at the time that the GM process with crops, as Jonathan said, you put a new gene and you're not sure where it's gone in the DNA. And actually when you do the safety testing in Europe and North America, what the companies do is look at the bit of DNA which they've modified, which they intended to modify. They don't look at all the rest of the DNA where the genes may also have gone.
No, you have to characterise the flanking DNA.
Yeah,
and define
but
where
not
it
the
is.
Whole thing.
Well, you know the whole genome, so you know exactly where they are.
Well,
it's true you didn't know that before. But
and you didn't have to show whether they might have had any adverse effects. You then did tests, as you said, Jonathan, for a short period of time, not for 2 years, as you would with a new medicine or a new pesticide even. So you had no idea whether this was going to have an intergenerational impact or an impact on something like the development of tumours, of cancers, which take much longer. So you have to look at the whole lifetime of these rats, which is about 2 years, which is what this recent French study did, which is why it caused so much controversy. So you had something which we felt was uncertain in its safety, where the regulatory system was designed not by scientists but by politicians to allow the use of GM, and didn't, in our view, deliver any guarantee of safety. And then you put it into an environment where you had no idea what impact it might have. And we found, for example, that genes will move the new genetic material from the roots of plants, Italian scientists found this, into the soil and destroy beneficial soil fungi, the BT.
What do you say about that, John?
But there's been very little research on it.
I mean, it sounds to me like some of the arguments you were making, had you been around in the 15th or 16th century, you'd certainly been strongly opposed to bringing maize, potatoes, tomatoes, sunflower from South America into the ecological environment of Europe, which was even more poorly understood in the 15th and 16th centuries than it is today. I mean, surely bringing a whole new species in and planting it in Europe is a much more dangerous thing to have done than taking a plant that you know a lot about and just putting in one gene where you know what it is. And let's make very clear
That's in
all
essence
of these,
what you do.
all of these proteins that are in these. This is why the regulatory system isn't even more onerous than it is, and it's certainly excessively onerous. All of these things have been in the human diet before. The BTs are BTs that organic farmers have been spraying on crops to control insects. So you can't get up there and say BT is dangerous because organic farmers use BT.
And the viral promoters and marker genes
What
would go with them.
What is a promoter? It's a way of making a gene make a gene.
It's an added gene to intensify the impact and to make sure that the gene you want to move, the BT gene, say, actually gets into the DNA and has an impact.
It
And
makes
the
the plant make enough
antibiotic-resistant
protein
marker gene, or whatever marker gene you use, these are not things that were there in nature, and they're not things that could ever happen naturally.
Calamine
The potato and the
is in the
tomatoes
soil.
were
It
in
came from
nature.
the soil. It can get back into the soil. It's GM plants are part of
I mean, there
the
was nothing
cycle of life.
fundamentally wrong with it, not really. Well, there's nothing fundamentally wrong.
Can I? Sorry, John. Sorry to interrupt.
You're more interesting than I am.
I mean,
You must
can I
understand I'm an amateur.
This pesticide. I mean, it does wind me up when Peter says pesticide use has gone up. I mean, pesticides sound terrible. They sound like something that could kill humans. Glyphosate is a compound with no mammalian toxicity. It inhibits a particular enzyme that is involved in making aromatic amino acids. Humans don't even have that enzyme. All plants have that enzyme. The Roundup-resistant plants are ones that have a slightly modified enzyme that means that they're refractory to the herbicide, they can't be inhibited by it, but they still function. So we've been eating EPSP synthase for a long time. Your guts are full of bacteria that make EPSP synthase.
Given that there have been a number of studies, I know they've all been criticised by people in your position, but there have been a number of studies in a number of different countries, some government funded, some independently funded, which have suggested that there may be problems when you get to longer term feeding trials with mice or rats. Do you think it would be good?
But the researchers have suggested.
Well, the scientists have
Yes,
concluded in peer-reviewed published papers, including right back with Dr. Putzai in the UK.
Which was the world's most illiterate plant molecular biology experiment.
Well, you see, that's what worries me about the scientific debate. Yeah, the
humour.
No, the attack on individuals, because to my mind, the joy and the wonder of science is that you publish your results and other scientists can say to themselves, that looks like the most illiterate rubbish I've ever come across. I'm going to repeat the experiment. And I'm going to do it better, and I'm going to do it so I can show. Now, of all these studies, from Dr. Putzai, which was back in what, 1999, 98, not one of the people who've attacked these studies have chosen to do what I think is fundamental to the integrity of science, which is to repeat the trial in a way they find acceptable. The Royal Society in this country, to its shame, attacked Putzai. He was sacked.
You're a fellow.
Not one of them,
But they haven't let me in at the time.
not one of them has suggested, look chaps, we're scientists, the right thing to do here is repeat the experiment. And that's true of the ones published a couple of months ago, the Seralini, the French team. They were attacked for using the wrong rats, although they're the same rats Monsanto uses, the wrong protocol, although it was a protocol established by the OECD, for claiming that they'd shown cancer when they didn't. They'd just shown the arrival of tumours and suggested a proper cancer study should be done. Nobody said, let's get this repeated.
Do it properly.
Do it properly.
I'd say one of the reasons
And
for
that's
that.
anti-science.
One of the reasons for that, the way things work is, even if you want to do an experiment, you have to write a proposal and get funded, and you have to actually write a proposal where you're excited about the hypothesis. that you want to test. You want to test your own ideas. That
Aren't you excited about the idea that maize doesn't give rats cancer after 2 years?
I'm not a nutritionist, and anyway, science is about having an idea about a mechanism that might be playing out. And to me, as I said earlier, there's no credible mechanism by which there could be a health hazard.
But there are scientists who think there might be. I mean, this is an area of scientific dispute, which of course is true of most of science.
A tiny minority.
Well,
but you're right, there are some.
Yeah.
I mean, I can think of Michael Antonew.
Yeah. Who's a geneticist who does medical genetic work at King's College. He's an eminent geneticist in his field, and he thinks there is a mechanism.
He's not a plant scientist, but actually he didn't propose a mechanism.
Medical geneticist.
He didn't propose a credible mechanism.
Well,
he just says, I feel there's cause for concern.
Yeah, and it seems to me that, as I say, the great joy of science is that you publish your results and you can then have them tested again. The trouble with GM is that most of the results aren't published.
There's an analogy to climate change here, I think. I mean, 4,000 climate scientists say, we got a problem, Houston. There are always one or two who say, no, I think it's fine, it's just sort of natural variation in solar cycles. I'm sorry, I'm with the 4,000 scientists on that
so
one.
am I.
And I'm with the 4,000 scientists on GM, and you're not.
I know, and I'm with the 4,000 scientists on climate change, partly because they have published data, it's been in the peer-reviewed literature, they haven't been claiming patents, they haven't gone along to regulatory authorities and say, here's our science, we've done a lot of research, we're not going to tell you how many studies we've done, we're not going to tell you which studies we're picking and which ones we're discarding, you can look at these ones, you can't tell anyone else about them. And the only one of those studies we've had access to is because Greenpeace took a lawsuit in Germany, got it released, it was reanalyzed, and the scientists who reanalyzed it said, hang on a minute, this shows the rats are getting ill. There's something worth looking at.
There's one thing I would agree with you on, which is that
that's not what climate scientists do, and if they do, as in UEA, they get into serious trouble if they try and hide the data.
One thing I would agree with you on is that it's wrong that the Monsantos and the Syngentas and whoever say that public sector scientists cannot get a hold of their seed to grow the stuff up to do their own experiments on. Because what have they got to be afraid of?
Yes.
Well, exactly. And it was Scientific American in an editorial, 6 years ago, there was an editorial saying this would be chilling if it was being done on something which didn't involve what we're eating every day.
If it was an insecticide manufacturer, I'd find it chilling, certainly.
Yeah. So, I mean, that's my concern, that this whole enterprise of GM crops, I mean, you can see how it happened. I was involved, I went to UEA in the very early 1990s for a debate about genetically engineered crops, when the scientists and ICI, who were still in existence and still doing GM then, thought this would be great for organic.
Yeah.
And I've talked to people who worked in Monsanto in the early, and they were all incredibly excited, and they thought this was a wonderful new thing. And the other bit of it that concerns me is all those people were enthusiastic, excited, this is going to feed the world, it's going to cure disease, we'll all be eating GM food by now, well before now and so on. Tremendously overhyped, but all of them, and those who were honest have subsequently, or self-aware, have admitted it, knew very little about farming and the pressures on farming. So, for example, the idea that since the war we've seen a loss of 95 to 98% of much farmland wildlife didn't come into their thinking. The idea that we might want to reverse that trend. The idea that we've lost soil. Well, it's true of the scientists in Monsanto.
If you can reduce pesticide use, then you can reduce the collateral damage.
Yeah, but what those early scientists thought, we'll put BT in the thing, or we'll put a Roundup-resistant gene in, and then we can use these herbicides. And so farmers said, well, what about resistance? Said, oh, we'll have to have protocols. Within 3 years, staggeringly quickly, far faster than I thought, I met a farmer from Iowa who was being sold a tank mix by Monsanto. So he was being sold 2 herbicides, Roundup and another one, because already he was getting Roundup-resistant weeds. And now, of course, we know it's a massive problem in America. A huge variety of weeds, not just resistant to Roundup, but the other herbicides we've been using. Because this technology suited large-scale farming with relatively few people and machines. So you could go, for example, on your spraying, instead of having to pick the right day with the right weather on your farm, you could go with your Roundup and spray from North Dakota to right through South Dakota without worrying about the weather or the timing.
I mean, the real problem with the way it
Suited
came out
big farmers
was that there was various competing products. There was cyanamide products, there was DuPont, the Glean, sulfonylureas, there was the glufosinate resistance from Bayer, and these were all actually more expensive herbicides. And so when the Roundup Ready worked, you know, they basically all gave up. And I think the right analogy to think about these herbicides and herbicide resistance is antibiotics. You know, you would not say if your daughter had a bug that would, could be eliminated with antibiotics, let's not use antibiotics because there might be a spread of resistance.
Nor would I say don't use a GM medicine if there's one that might say that.
Well, there you go. So,
but
the point is that
get better.
if you've got, let's say, 4 possible weed control GM technologies, let's deploy them all and rotate. Same as you with compound after compound. Antibiotics. If you keep using the same compound, you'll end up making it useless. So wise, judicious use of these compounds is what's required. And so now, of course, the glufosinate resistance is going to be deployed more, and there's the dicamba resistance, which is not the same as 2,4,5-T resistance. And there are others in the pipeline that people are working on.
But it's an interesting analogy because at Soil Association we've been working